Widening social rifts define our era, driven by indignant anger and manipulation through engineered fear and division. To move forward and heal, we need secure men and strong women. But more importantly, we must learn how to listen to each other. As I asked women around me how I could help, I started to understand that the idea I once considered a conclusion was only the beginning.
Women want to be heard, but it's not enough yet. So don't just hear us, but hear us when we say that everything that's happening is not enough to treat us as fully valuable, fully worthy human beings, equal in every way to men.
A unified answer that branches out into infinite diversity, with one common factor. The people not listening tend to be men.
But women cannot make men listen, and certainly cannot integrate what they hear into understanding and action. Only men can do that for themselves.
So if men can't listen to women, LGBTQ+, minority groups, or other people with different perspectives, maybe they can listen to a man having a conversation with these people. I'm inviting you into my journey to become a better listener and meet some intriguing people along the way. Just a quick note at the beginning of the podcast that there is a lot of music discussed during this episode, and Eve and I are going to build a Spotify playlist that is sort of a companion piece to this episode. So please look for that in the show notes. On to the show. Hello and welcome to the If Men Can't Listen To podcast. And we've got a lot of new listeners recently, and I was been really blown away by seeing where some of these listeners are coming from. Seeing that people are listening in all over different continents, different countries, fond memories of being in Iceland, and we even got a couple of listeners there. So all of you new listeners, welcome, and thank you very much for listening. Today, we have Eve, and Eve is somebody I met on Instagram. We were talking about, I believe it was something to do with trans rights, and we really got into a conversation there, but it led into many other things, including music and... Well, anyways, I'm going to shut up and let Eve introduce herself.
So my name is Eve. I'll be 35 this year in April. I've been in the IT field for many years. I've been in the creative field for many years. I've done surveillance work. I've done producing work. Let's see, I've done work in... theaters. I've done graphic design and freelance illustration. I've worked in education. I've done a lot of different things and worn a lot of different hats before.
And it sounds like you're finally getting your personal journey underway to live in your authenticity too. So that's yet another hat. And I know that a lot of this stuff is sort of behind a private account, so we're not going to say anything you don't want to say, but it's a journaling of your progress through this journey, and it's really nice to be able to take that journey with you.
So I started the private account as a safe space in January when I decided to transition with my doctor. I worked with my psychiatrist last year, and we got me to a stable point mentally. So I am transgender. I started hormone replacement therapy in January 18th to be specific. And so far I am on week 11 of hormone replacement therapy.
Right on. I know, and it's been like a really kind of heartfelt thing for you, and I know it's been a hard one to share, but it's just amazing that you've invited a few people in on this, and I am very honored to be one of them. And something I want to ask that a lot of people would ask right away, and it's usually out of curiosity, mostly out of ignorance, and it can be asked in a very hurtful way. So I'm going to ask it in what I feel is the authentic way. When did you know? Not when did you decide, but when did you know that's who you were?
I was 13 years old.
Okay. And 35 now, it's taken you that long to feel comfortable publicly being yourself. And I know a lot of that is cultural where you're at. And is that something you want to kind of illustrate?
So I was raised in a very religious family. I had a very religious upbringing. I was raised Baptist. I was scared into being baptized at the age of 10. And then at the age of 13, we moved out of that city into the country in East Texas. So in the middle of nowhere. And I was forced into a situation that I really did not want to be in. I had always known that I was different from a very young age, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't know what it was. I wasn't educated. And it took me a while to figure out what it was that I was dealing with. And I kind of had to keep it a secret because my parents weren't really loving people. They weren't accepting people. So it's something that I've been dealing with since I was 13. I had come across a video of Candy Darling. Candy Darling was very famous with the Velvet Underground, Lou Reed era, and Andy Warhol. And Candy was probably the first trans woman that I ever knew about or ever came across. And that was how I found out the word transgender.
So you mentioned like all the Lou Reed and stuff like that. And, you know, one of the things I've seen in some of your stories is, your love of music. And one of the things that kind of had my jaw on the floor is your, what did you call it? It was a storage area that looked like if Indiana Jones was written about musicians, and at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they had that endless supply of crates, there's just endless supplies of music stuff. You just want to tell me a little bit about your musical background?
So it started with one record. I'll start at the very beginning for you. It started with one record. I was 15. My grandfather had taken me to a used bookstore, and I had come across a record that I had never seen before. I had never bought a record, but this record spoke to me, and it was beaten up, and it was dirty and dusty and a little scratchy, but I think I paid maybe $10 for it. And I took it home, and I asked my father to dig out his turntable and set it up for me and show me how to use it. And that was the first time that I heard Quadrophenia by The Who. And that album ended up saving my life as a teenager. And since then, I've been collecting vinyl records, and I have amassed a record collection of probably 600 to 700 records. So I have a lot of those records still in storage. Some of them are in climate control here in the house. So what you've seen on my stories is just what I have readily available. I don't have any place to catalog them or put them on a shelf. They're just in boxes right now. So they're safe from the elements.
Okay. So from Quadrophenia, now is this the original quadraphonic thing, or is it just the regular stereo Quadrophenia?
It was the regular stereo version. It still had the booklet in it, and the booklet was a big part of saving my life as well.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So it is a story about a teenage boy who's struggling to find his place in society. This is back when you had the mods and the bikers. So you had really nice dress people, and then you had people in like biker jackets. So you had people that rode Vespa scooters, and then you had people that rode Harley Davidsons and motorcycles. And there was this kind of war going on within the album. And the main character was struggling with substance abuse. He was struggling with his identity. He was struggling with his parents and them not accepting him. He was trying to figure out his place in the world, and it really resonated with me at that time because I had undiagnosed mental health problems at that time and was really struggling to figure out myself, my place in the world, and my purpose.
That sounds like a really familiar story, and it's funny how art can just sneak up and get you when you need it the most. I similarly had a Baptist upbringing, and because of that, our parents run on the software that was installed into them by their parents, and hopefully we at least make an incremental improvements. And my mom was my primary caregiver, and because of her Baptist upbringing, really didn't believe all that much in mental health. So I suffered through maybe a little bit more than a decade of just crushing depression as a kid.
As did I.
Yeah, and a lot of it was around self-esteem and sense of worth. And then I saw this movie in my teens called Angus. It's about this kid really struggling to be someone else, socially, and then, realizing that he could just be himself, and that's really what was important. And that, everyone is hiding behind this idea of trying to fit in. And it just in the moment I needed it most, this piece of art came through and really helped me disconnect from trying to be someone else to survive, and helped me try to connect with myself internally. And, similar to Quadrophenia for you, it just this one chance viewing of a movie. And it wasn't like I even watched it, I even think a second time until adulthood. But this one chance viewing of this piece of art completely altered my trajectory. And it's art can touch people in such significant and life-altering ways, and it's a beautiful thing.
So I had a similar experience with Martin Scorsese's The Aviator and Howard Hughes, and learning about Howard Hughes and his mental struggles and his mental disorders. Throughout my teenage years, I really struggled with severe depression. My parents were in denial of it. From a young age, I showed signs of bipolar disorder, and they ignored it until I had a complete breakdown, probably around the age of 17 or 18. And I myself made myself an appointment to see a mental health professional. And that's when I first got on medication. And I've been on medication for over 15 years.
And to go back a little bit too, and being a kid who has discovered something about themselves that isn't even really tolerated by their environment, putting that kind of stress and trauma on somebody for that many years can easily contribute to those things. And it's something I just didn't want to gloss over, because there's a lot of people who view any sort of dysphoria, or realizing that you were assigned a gender at birth that was different than your reality. They all view that as tied into these things, but I don't think they understand the difference between causation and just something that happens along with a lifelong repression of who you are. That can put a zap on anybody.
It did really deeply affect me mentally and physically for many years. And for many years I was in the dark. I was severely isolated. And because of my mental health struggles, I delved deep into art and drawing and painting and music. And music was a big part of my life, and it still continues to be a big part of my life to this day.
So what's your, this is just a random question, because I'm pretty susceptible to tangents, and I'm a bit of a music nerd myself. What's your go-to comfort food music? What do you like? I've had a long day, and I'm getting in the car, I'm shutting the door, I need to exhale, and this is going to make me happier.
it literally changes each week. Like I have this weird relationship with my subconscious. So when I wake up in the morning, some mornings I will have a song in my head that is relevant to what is happening to my life either that day or that week. It'll be relevant to something very specific, or it'll be a broad overview. But usually my self-conscious is very good at staying on point about something very specific that I am struggling with or dealing with at that time. So my comfort music can change from day to day or week to week.
Fair enough. Like, what's your, because I've actually said that I don't have a favorite song, but if I ever had to average it out, this one is never at the top, but it's always in the top 5. So that's Green Onions by Booker T and the MGs.
Classic.
And it's literally never been at the top. And it has probably been pretty low on that like list of like, it might even slip past the top 5, right? But it's always on that list somewhere towards the top. Is there any particular artist or song that's like that for you?
There are a lot that come to mind. There have been a lot of musicians and bands that have been very influential to me throughout my entire life. The one that comes to mind currently is probably Radiohead, to be honest with you.
Oh, and my wife would be very happy to hear that, because when I first met her, I didn't get Radiohead. Like, it didn't really resonate with me at all. And I just kind of like, oh, okay, it's all right. You know, it's nothing wrong with it. And the more I listened to it with her, I am now a Radiohead fan, and we've actually gone to see The Smile, which is Tom York's other project. And
yes, it is.
Yeah, that was a good show, but it's like I never in a million years would have thought that I liked Radiohead. But like now, what's the one song? It's like Everything in the Right Place or something like that.
Yes, it's off of Kid A.
Yeah, and that one's probably my favorite. But out of nowhere, I would have not have imagined this in a million years. But what I've come to understand is the more that you know about music, the more Radiohead like tends to be sort of a dog whistle for people who are very informed about music. And I am not informed on the mechanics. I just know what I like. I'm a consumer, right? I'm not as much a creator. You know, if I was able to move this camera, you'd see there's a keyboard there, there's a keyboard there, there's a keyboard there, there's a pad there. Like, none of these are my things, right? And I'm not a nuts and bolts of music kind of guy, but like there's something about it. The more I listen to her and the more I understand, the more I come to like Radiohead. And again, it's just like, I never realized how like meticulous Jamiroquai was until, you know, she kind of pointed some of that stuff out too. And it's weird. Like, I love that, finding something new that I never would have looked at before. And yeah, that Radiohead is definitely key in that.
So Tom York resonates with me not only in his lyrics, but his vocal performance, his falsetto. The first album that I came across by Radiohead was OK Computer. And that was very influential to me. And I had never heard anything like it at the time. And I have grown up with Radiohead, and I have progressed with them and their discography. Each album means something very different to me. And the one that means the most to me is probably In Rainbows. Because at the time that it came out, it was the very first album when they were like, we did this, you can have it for free if you want it. They literally said you can name your own price. You don't have to pay anything if you don't want to. Here it is. And that was kind of mind-blowing for a band of their status to do. And that album really resonated with me because that was the same year that I started working at 16. So I was driving a lot to work back and forth, listening to that album. And I remember Tom talking about that album in an interview where he said that there was a lot of hidden things inside the album. And I come back to that album each year and I try to figure out, what did he hide in there? And one year I figured out that the track Videotape is syncopated, and a lot of people won't understand that. And you'll have to look up the word syncopated and then listen to the album and the song to figure it out. It's a very technical song, but some people would say, oh, it's a very simplistic song. But there's nothing simple about it. And there's a lot of hidden meaning within the words and the music itself. So music to me is more than just sounds.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's sort of like I'll have to look into that, because I'm sure if I ask my wife about that, she'll like, oh yeah, this, and this, because it sounds like it's a bit of like an audio Where's Waldo.
Kind of, yes.
Okay.
It is very interesting.
All right, so something I'm hearing you talk with a lot of like real passion for music, and I'm wondering, as a kid, kind of off on an island in the country, starting to learn things about yourself, like how much did music factor in as almost like a companion when everything around you forced you inwards in your identity? How did it feel? And, was there any other like key journeys of discovery through music? Because I got to imagine it's like opening the door to Narnia, and suddenly, everything is a little bit more vivid when you can connect with something that makes it feel a little bit more okay to be you.
So when I was a teenager, there was not a resurgence of vinyl yet. So people were getting rid of their collections. And my mother had a friend who gave me his entire collection. And in that collection, I came across a record that is very near and dear to my heart now, and it means a lot to me ever since I found it. And it is the album called More Songs About Buildings and Food by the Talking Heads. It is their second record, and it brought me into the world of David Byrne and the Talking Heads. And it really opened up my world a lot, because I had never heard somebody like that, singing like that. I had never heard music like that before. The instruments were different. They had a lot of sounds from the 80s, a lot of synthesizers, and a lot of different synthesis than we are used to hearing these days. So when I go back and I listen to that record, it brings back a lot of things for me personally. Right on.
I've found that they're good like travel and exploration music too. Like just I can't even think of any in particular. I tend to just and this is where I admit that I'm a little lazy musically. I typically and I used to do this on Pandora, now I do it on Spotify. I'll make a station and just let it wander, but I will base it around certain things. Oh, you're shaking your head at me. I'm being judged.
I do not pay into streaming services. I do not use them. I have my own digital library that I have had from the beginning of iTunes.
Right on.
So I have owned all of my music ever since I was a teenager. So I used to buy CDs, rip them to my laptop, put it on my iPad Classic, and return the CD.
Well, I used to do a lot of... because you're talking about vinyl, I think we shared a little bit of a shared hobby there. In my late teens and into my early 20s, I remember my first introduction to using Linux was I built a 5x86, like a 46 upgrade. And it was the only reason I had it. It was out of this like Frankenstein out of used parts kind of deal. But it was in the early days of MP3, and it was a command line only MP3 encoder, and I still have some of those on my phone from back then when I used to do it. But my personal journey is a little bit different with music because I like to hear things I haven't heard before. So I look at it more as like a way to expose myself to new things. And through like, I started, I'll go back a little bit. I travel for a living, and with my off time, I like to go exploring, usually away from people. So I go out on these long, windy mountain roads, and I will have typically like Herb Alpert or something like that going. But that's where I discovered like Piero Umiliani and what is it? Alessandro. I can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head, but like all of these people from like the 60s, and it's this music that, you know, somebody's grandparents definitely got down to, and it's just this amazing like exploration, like grandiose kind of thing, and I wouldn't have been able to find that if I had just gone with my own stuff. But now I find myself going back and going to like thrift shops and record stores and stuff like that and finding these same albums on on vinyl. And like the last one that I got that I was really impressed with finding was like what's his name? The Brazilian guy. It's Sergio Mendes, I think it is.
Okay.
I found one of his. I love finding these things that people now wouldn't give a second look at, and it's just like, oh wow, like, and here I am. I'm like, the hair's going up on my arms and stuff, and I'm so excited. And it's like, this is something that somebody threw out from their grandpa because they didn't care about. But that's the kind of stuff and it all is because I got a chance to discover new things. So I feel like there's merit to both ways, but it seems like you're more on the technical side of things. Like you have this is what I like, I'm going to go hard into this area. No?
Not exactly. No, I used to go crate digging. The last time I was in New York, I went to Bleecker Street Records and found a bunch of records. On that trip, one of my father's business associates taught me about Steely Dan.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember driving through Manhattan in his BMW, listening to Steely Dan, and he had drumsticks beside his seat, and he would pull out the drumsticks at a red light, and he would play along to Steely Dan. So I've done a lot of crate digging in the past. I've done a lot of thrifting. It just depends on where I am geographically. But when it comes to learning about new music, I check for new music releases every single Friday.
So you're way more hardcore about this than I am.
Yes, music means a great deal to me.
Yep.
So I may have amassed a huge digital library, but the records that mean the most to me, I will go out and buy on vinyl, or sometimes buy twice. It just depends on how much I love it. Sometimes I'll buy a record twice so I can give somebody else a copy because I love it that much.
I like that.
It just depends on the record. But music means a great deal to me. I sincerely and honestly miss my iPod Classic because it was just like the ultimate escape for me. It had everything on it. I could take it with me everywhere, and it was just like a backup plan no matter what. If I was having a bad day or a good day, it could accompany me and be a soundtrack to my life. Vinyl records are a little difficult because you have to keep them at home. You have to keep them clean. You have to keep the turntable level or you'll get scratches. So they're a little more fragile. So I have amassed a large digital library that I can take with me everywhere.
Usually there's certain situations where like I know I'm going to be in a bad mood. Like for instance, tax time is coming up. And I have like a couple of go-tos then, and I know what you mean. Like it's more of a whole feeling where you're going to sit down and you're actually going to listen to it, and it's not just something you're doing for convenience. But like Billy Joel's The Stranger gets played like usually end to end right around tax time, like right when I'm like, I've finished it all up. I don't like what I came up with, and I'm just in a funk, and I'll throw on The Stranger, and that'll sort me out.
That's good to know. That's good to know that you have something like that to fall back upon.
Oh yeah. And it's sometimes music can bring me back to a place. Like you're talking about doing these record bin dives. We went on our honeymoon. My wife and I went to Iceland, and the first thing we did, because we rented an older vehicle, you can actually do that there if you plan on like into the wilder parts of Iceland. You rent these older vehicles that already have the scratches and dents and stuff on them. And the one we rented only had a CD player. Didn't have the ability to, excuse me, I got the hiccups. Didn't have the ability to play anything other than CDs. So what we did is we went into a local record store and just asked the guy behind the counter, here's what we normally like. What would you recommend, but only with Icelandic artists? And he had all these things. And we had this stack of CDs like this tall in the little truck with us. And that's what we had in Iceland. And, I'll still listen to Amabadama sometimes. And it's this Icelandic reggae group. Really super good. Ulfur Ulfur comes to mind. But all of those things, I'll listen to that and it'll feel like I'm, for a moment, it'll just give me that like hint of being back in Iceland.
Like Iceland to me is Björk and Sigur Rós.
Yes. You and my wife would get along very much I was going to grab this Björk concert poster off the wall, but it's way up in the staircase. There's no way I'll get to it. But no, she's a huge Björk fan, and before that, I was into like big stereos and stuff like that. So like Hyper Ballad, there you go. That was definitely some good stuff. But then she's like really big into Björk, and I started listening to some of the other stuff, and it was like, oh yeah, okay. But yeah, the Sigur Rós thing, the weird thing for me is that they're all like, it's not lyrics as much as vocalizations. And like, correct. Once I got my head around that, that's an interesting listen too. Like I've learned to like a lot, not like, that's a bad way to describe it. I think she's just rubbed off on me. Like stuff that I wouldn't have given a second thought, now I like, and it wasn't intentional.
Well, Jansi created his own language for Sigur Rós, so he's not necessarily singing real words. I can't remember what he calls it, but on some records he's just singing random words, and some records he's singing Icelandic words. There is a documentary called Heima, which I believe is home for Icelandic. I could be completely wrong. It is a wonderful documentary showing Sigur Rós through their travels throughout Iceland. And one of my favorite scenes is they come across a farmer, a musician, that makes music with rhubarb stalks and stones that he finds naturally. So he created a xylophone with these stones that naturally resonate, and he makes music with the tones from the rocks and stones. And it's something that I always think about every time I think of Sigur Rós is the fjords, the ice, the water, the scenery, the people. Sigur Rós just means a lot to me. Their music is very powerful, and it can build up to a massive sound, something that you aren't expecting, and it can bring up emotions and feelings that you weren't prepared for. And Björk can do the exact same thing. If you're not prepared, you're going to have some emotional experience that you weren't ready for. And there's just something about Iceland and Icelandic people. They live completely different than we do here in the United States. And there's something unique and magical about it to me.
Mm-hmm. Like we got out of Reykjavik right away. I think we only spent, out of the 7 days we were there, I think we only spent like 2 days in Reykjavik. And as we went around the countryside, it was definitely, it's like, oh, I totally understand why Björk's now like Björk. Like it made sense. Like the uniqueness, the strangeness, but it's all wonderfully Icelandic. It's not strange when it all starts to make sense, but it is very different than anything I was used to. But yeah, it's just, they're just wonderfully weird.
Ask your wife about the documentary. She may have the DVD. If she doesn't, you should buy it immediately and watch it together.
Well, I actually just made a note of it, so I'm gonna ask her about that at the end of this when we're done recording.
Perfect.
So with all of this love of music and all this passion for music, when did you decide to become professionally involved in it?
When I moved out to the desert, I came across some musicians that wanted to record. I just so happened to have the equipment to record them. So I took on the role as producer and produced 3 or 4 musicians myself. I had no idea what I was doing. I made my own makeshift vocal booths. I made my own makeshift studios and literally just pieced things together with used equipment off of eBay, anything I could thrift and find, cassette tapes, cassette recorders, micro cassette recorders, kids' toys, xylophones, toy pianos, toy guitars, like anything I could make sounds with, we would use and make music with. And that's where it kind of started with me, is having to take the lead role of guiding somebody through their own music and turning it into like a complete song and polishing it and letting them take that into the world to represent themselves. So I've been making music on my own for a very long time. So like sitting right next to me, I have a Moog analog synthesizer. I have a Teenage Engineering OP1. Behind me, I have a Roland Juno. I've got 2 microcorgs underneath the bed. I've got a couple of other analog synthesizers. I've got 808 sitting over there. I've got a bunch of random things. I used to have a bunch of guitars. I can play guitar, bass, drums, you name it.
That's an impressive amount of equipment. Like the second you said Moog, it just kind of like, oh, okay. And then the list just kept getting more impressive. So I'm actually kind of jealous that you have an actual 808.
It's not a real one, it's a recreation.
But still, it's pretty cool. My weirdest piece of gear is I found this at a thrift store. I don't know if you recognize this.
I do, the digital guitar, yeah.
Yeah, I got it for my kid and my wife to play around with, but it's the weirdest thing. It's somebody stuck a synthesizer brain in a guitar body, and it's just very strange how it works. Like the actual like method of how it functions fascinated the hell out of me, but I can't play it. But
it's hard to play because those strings are not normal.
And you can't strum it.
It's like pieces of plastic. It's very difficult to play like a normal guitar.
Yeah, and it doesn't pick up like it's not like a normal pickup where it's like an analog sensor or anything. It's literally just understanding that there's a amplitude of a string being plucked, and then it like feeds all of it, and everything on the neck is just a modifier. And it's so strange.
Yeah, it's all MIDI, isn't it?
Yep, it does. Yeah. I think it even has a MIDI out on it somewhere.
Yeah, it should.
I'm not sure. I'd have to look at it again.
Some of those models had to connect to like a base station that would process everything. There's a couple different models, so I haven't seen that Casio one before, but I have seen many that are similar to it, and each one is unique in their own way.
Yeah, this is a DG1, which is the first one they put out, and I want to say it was 81 or so.
Okay.
So this is a really crude one, and I've seen the ones that came after it, and they look like a space shuttle in comparison.
Yes.
But like this is like the cheesiest Casio synthesizer ever in a guitar body. And if I had the power cord out for it, I'd let you hear how it sounds, but like it would just be noise because I don't know what the hell I'm doing with it. But still, it's if you go on YouTube and look it up, it's really it's an interesting piece.
Yeah, definitely. You'll have to send me a link or something.
Yeah, but I mean, what the whole reason I even brought that out is because you were talking about it's not about, sometimes it's not the high class music or instruments, it's the ability to make noise. And sometimes like with the Talking Heads and that kind of stuff, it really seemed to me like they had found a new way to make a noise that hadn't been present before, and they just leaned into the uniqueness of the sound instead of trying to make it sound like anything else. Like one that comes to mind for me is on Pleasure Victim, Berlin, the whole album. Like that's one of my night driving go-tos, right? But there's the, and I want to say it's like a Sawtooth Wave in the Metro where it like they just let it rip. and it's just this like treble drill that goes into your brain, but it sounds like nothing else that would have happened before.
Well, in the 80s, you had FM synthesis, which is frequency modulation. And one of the most famous synthesizers from that area is the Yamaha DX7. You've heard it on many records. Prince had a DX7. You can find pictures of it online, which still has his notes on the actual unit itself. And frequency modulation was a big deal in the 80s. It's all over the Talking Heads records. And they also do use analog synthesizers. But FM synthesis was very heavy at the 80s. That's an 80s sound, is FM synthesis.
Okay. And how is that like different from like the Moog?
Moog is analog circuits.
Aha.
Yeah, so it's all capacitors and I don't even know what goes into a Moog synthesizer, because to me it's like this magical creation that Bob created, and you just respect it and let it be.
And then Wendy Carlos taught it how to sing. Like, holy crap.
Yes, she did, and she was also a big proponent for me because she was transgender as well.
Like the one that's really interesting, if you look at some of the pictures of when she was still going by Walter Carlos, she had already started the hormones, and the sideburns are fake.
They are fake, and they're amazing, but also terrible at the same time.
Yep. And that had to be like, I feel like people like that, just by their presence, have softened people in a way that like it brought humanity to a concept. Instead of just that person being a concept, there was a humanity to it, because people have been hearing Wendy Carlos, you know, in like Tron and in all of this.
Orange.
Yeah. And I even have like one of the early, I think I got to look at it now, because now I'm scratching my head. I want to say it has both Wendy and Walter Carlos written on it in different spots.
I did not know that. That's pretty interesting.
So I'm on a look at it. It's that's what I'm gonna have to follow up with you on. So I've got it's weird, because like there was that point where they were huge and they were on everything, and then she, you know, publicly changes to Wendy Carlos, and it wasn't. I don't think it was that big of a fuss compared to how it is even like a decade after that, where people really got judgmental about it. But it was probably uncomfortable just because people didn't have any sort of understanding. And I think it's good to see like their first understanding of even that concept being someone who is a positive person.
So going back to Candy Darling and Lou Reed, I'm going to read the lyrics and you can figure it out.
Oh, you're talking Wildside, right?
Holly came from Miami, FLA, hitchhiked her way across the USA, plucked her eyebrows along the way, shaved her legs, and then she was a she. She says, "Hey, babe, take a walk on the wild side."
Right.
Candy came out from the island in the back room. She was everybody's darling, but she never lost her head. Even when she was giving head, she says, "Hey, babe, take a walk on the wild side." And it goes on and on and on. And the first time I heard that, I was like, wow. It was just mind-blowing to me. Like, shaved her legs and then he was a she. And I was like, you can do that? That's possible? Like, I don't have to be this thing that I don't want to be. I can be somebody else. And music has been kind of like an instrumental part of my gender identity and my journey through my transition and my life and my mental health. And it's something that's always been there. So when you talk about Wendy Carlos, I always think about trans musicians and the pathway that they have paved for people like me.
Mm-hmm. And that happened even in just regular, like Rob Halford and Freddie Mercury and stuff. And, you know, people didn't realize until, you know, Freddie Mercury was almost gone that he was gay. He didn't really come out. Rob Halford didn't come out for a long time, and people associated like the whole leather thing as being like this badass rock and roll thing, and it was really, he snuck that in the back door. Like they didn't realize what they were thinking was so badass, and it was badass, period. But then they, realized it was this, and it's still there. It's still prevalent because of Rob Halford. And also, how did nobody know Liberace was gay? Like, all of that being there as these incredibly positive people in the media really, I think, did every bit as much work as Harvey Milk. And I feel the same for like a lot of trans people.
Well, what really kind of fucked me up was David Bowie.
Oh, yes.
Because he crossed so many gender lines. It's like,
Yep.
Is he a man? Is he a woman? Is he a he? Is he a she? And it was just basically like whatever he wanted to be that day or that week or that year or that album cycle. It just depended,
Oh, and I'll openly admit that I feel like I'm very much straight, right? I'm this like normal, boring, straight, cis white man. But then I watch something about David Bowie in the 80s, and suddenly I'm learning things about myself. Like, I am like 99% straight, with that 1% straight being about like 1985 David Bowie. So, like, I get it.
Well, that makes me happy. I'm a big David Bowie fan as well. I have a bunch of his records on vinyl as well. That's funny. Hunky Dory was a big deal for me when I came across that album on vinyl.
Yeah, my exposure to it was my stepdad. He would get up super early in the morning on weekends and like start cleaning and just doing all this weird stuff, and we all wanted to sleep in, but like 6:00 in the morning, like Led Zeppelin would come on or something like that, but about half the time it would be like David Bowie or Level 42 or something like that. And like,
Okay.
I would be, what my fame was, my alarm clock, like it would happen, it'd kick into one of those albums. And yeah, I think that's where I started with it. But like, Labyrinth comes along and you see that on TV and you're starting to go,
He
Am I?
invented the package with that movie. David Bowie invented the package with Labyrinth. I don't know if you know that. You'll have to go back and watch it.
I didn't.
But it is very prominent. That is like, it's in your face. The package. That's
Right.
where it started.
Okay. Because like, there's more than one ball in that movie. Like the whole glass ball thing, like that's not the only ball in that movie. But yeah, it's just something, I think it was more the energy than anything. That incredibly, how would you put it? But just that energy, like that, it's not necessarily sexual, but it is very erotic.
Yes.
And it's like almost this like overpowering, overwhelming presence that he had. And I think
Yes.
that's what kind of got me like, am I? Like, I am, but like, if David Bowie came along and started like singing half of the stuff he was singing in the 80s in my ear quietly, I don't know that I would, maintain that.
You would just have to go along with
Yeah,
it and
you would.
see where it took you. He was a very, very interesting person. On Hunky Dory, he's got a song called Changes, and the lyrics say, "Time may change me, but you can't trace time." And he had all these sayings like that in a lot of his songs. And those things stick with me and resonate with me. And it's just interesting.
One of my favorite things about David Bowie isn't David Bowie related at all. It was, there was one time he was asking, or someone was asking him why he didn't like perform in San Francisco all that much. I think it was San Francisco. Now I'm trying to remember. But the whole his answer was, they already have Sylvester. Why do I need to go there? Like it was interesting to see what these artists considered their space was and how it overlapped in ways that I wouldn't normally process. And like you get people like Sylvester and it's like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Like when you think about it. And I was watching a documentary on Sylvester, and that's where that came to mind, and it like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense that David Bowie would see it that way.
you don't want to impede on their domain. You want to let them thrive and grow into whatever they want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And David knew that, and he kept to his own spaces or would go places where there weren't people like him.
That makes
So
sense.
he was pretty groundbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
And even his last album was mind blowing, and it's haunting, to be honest with you, because he was preparing us for his death, and the music videos and everything, and it's still mind blowing to me every time I listen to Black Star. It's very heavy, but it's something that I treasure greatly, and I'm glad that he was able to make it, even as sick as he was.
I feel the same way about that last Queen album where they did like The Show Must Go On and These Are the Days of Our Lives. Like this, just it's like, it's so good, but at the same time, you know, that's him saying goodbye. And it's like, he would literally have to like sit down in between verses because he couldn't do it.
Yep. Yeah. So I am not a Queen fan because when my brother was 13, he was very suicidal and put into the hospital. And when he came home, the only thing that he listened to for months on end was Queen, over and over and over. And I just could not handle it. And ever since then, I just can't handle Queen. I respect them. Brian May's a genius. Freddie Mercury's a genius. His register is incredible. I don't know how he did what he did with his voice. The mustache is iconic. You know, I've seen performances and everything. But Queen is just not for me. I don't have any of their records, but I respect them highly.
Fair enough. I mean, you know, that's understandable to have that kind of connection to something and have it, you know, feel very like it's going to bring up those feelings again, you know? I think it's something we keep coming back to is like the music is like a direct connection to emotions for some people. And I feel like you
Yes.
and I are very much on that same page where it's not just background noise, it means something.
Absolutely. And that goes back to my subconscious. Like, I'll wake up with a song in my head and it's like, okay, that sounds like a nice song. And then I'll get up and I'll look at the lyrics and listen to it. And it's like, whoa, that's exactly what I'm dealing with right now. How did my brain make that connection while I was asleep? Because even I can't make the connections that my subconscious does when I wake up. And it's kind of, it is terrifying. And it happens often, every week, multiple times a week. And it's crazy. And I try my best to document it on my stories because my stories is like a video diary for me. And it's me documenting my life and my transition. And I started doing that in January, but it ties back to a project that I did in college called Simple Images. I had gotten a cell phone, and it was one of the first cell phones that could take pictures. And I took pictures every single day for a year and called it Simple Images. And I created a blog, and I still have all of those images, and eventually I'll make a book out of them. So I've been documenting things for a really long time, and music has been a big part of it.
That sounds like you're kind of, I don't know if you ever thought about like doing some sort of, well, I suppose the rights would be kind of hard, but like some sort of art project in video tying music into that kind of stuff.
Legally, it's probably not kosher.
Right. That's why I stopped myself. Like, this is a good idea, but like, oh, never mind.
It would be interesting. I am lucky that I can do it on my stories and my posts and share music with people that I care about deeply and that mean a lot to me.
Yeah, and I'm really honored that you put me in that bubble, honestly.
Well, the way that you were speaking, the things that you were speaking about, and you asked for people to reach out to you, and I was like, this could be an amazing opportunity, and I figured, why not?
I appreciate that. So, you know, we've kind of wandered through your journey through life and music. and I don't know if this ties in, did music tie in any way to you finally finding the courage to live authentically?
No. Um, it all tied into my mental health disorders. I was hospitalized for being extremely suicidal. I had severe depression, bipolar disorder type 2. And in the hospital, I had two medical students studying me because I came out to my doctor as transgender. And these students were like, okay, can we study you? Can we write a paper on you? And I was like, sure, you can do that. I was open and I was brave with doctors because I feel like I could trust them and be myself with them. But during that same visit, I also made the decision to come out to my parents, and I was 22, 23. So I knew that I was transgender for over a decade. And during that hospital stint, I asked the doctor to help me tell them what was really going on. And I told them that I was transgender, that I was pansexual, and it changed everything. They disowned me. They essentially just let me down. They put me down. They didn't understand. They refused to understand. And that's when my relationship with my parents ended, because they disowned me and rejected me for me trying to be honest and open and vulnerable with them.
And, it's ironic that they probably, felt that why was this happening to them or something nonsensical like that. And the whole, when you most needed their help, they walked away. And I can't, as a parent, ever imagine doing that to my kid, no matter if I agreed with them or not. If they, if they're being vulnerable with me and asking me for help, I'll try everything I can to understand.
Like, if you were a parent in today's society, if you want to have a kid or planning to have a kid, accept them as they are or as they want to be. Mm-hmm. Do not judge them. Love them unconditionally for who they are. If you can't, don't have kids.
Right. Like, you can set them off. You can, set them off in a direction, but they may not stay in it. And one of the things I've really, like, the proudest thing that I've seen with my own kids is watching them become their own person, independent of my thought process, that they are not just parroting what I say. And I love seeing where their life is taking them. And I couldn't imagine requiring them to think like me. And I'm so sorry that you had to survive in that situation when the people you should have been able to count on most walked away.
It's funny that you say survive, because I have been surviving for so many years. And last year I made the decision to no longer survive, but to live. So in January of 2025, without knowing that the world would slowly eat itself and that the United States would try to exterminate people like me, I started my transition and stayed true to myself, and have continued to stay true to myself for 11 weeks now.
That's very, very brave, and to not be discouraged by what has got to feel somewhat familiar in terms of that kind of suppression, to just go, oh no, now it's happening everywhere, not just at, my parents' place, to keep going. And people who don't know anybody who is transitioning or has had to struggle with finding their authentic self, I don't think they understand that this isn't a choice. People wouldn't go around seeking to do something this difficult. You only would face it with this level of adversity if it was genuinely who you are and you just couldn't live somebody else's lie about yourself anymore?
Well, this is my second time being Eve and living as Eve. It's my first time being on hormones. The first time I was out as Eve was when I was in the desert, when I was producing those musicians. I was learning who I wanted to be. I was painting my fingernails. I grew my hair out. I looked different. People accepted me as Eve. They knew me as Eve. And I had a sexual assault. I had a man with facial hair rape me, and they sent me to the local hospital, and I stayed there overnight, and then a police officer drove me to a mental health facility that was like a prison, and they literally stripped me of all my clothes, my belongings, everything. And after that experience, I had to hide Eve away and protect myself. So I was living unauthentically as somebody else for many years until I couldn't do it anymore. You know, I lived as another person. I had an output as another person, a creative output, jobs, careers. You know, I was a completely different person than I am now. And at the end of 2024, I was like, okay, no more of this. I can't do it. I have to be my true self. Otherwise, I cannot function or survive. I have to live authentically. I have to be true to myself. I have to take care of myself. I come first. If I can't take care of myself, I can't take care of anybody else. And so it's been a very arduous and traumatizing journey, but I am still standing up and squeezing lemons, I say. I've been kind of sick for the past 6 to 7 weeks, and I had pharyngitis, thought I had strep throat. So I've been drinking a lot of hot tea, and on my stories, I keep telling myself I'm still standing up and squeezing lemons. So it's become kind of like a positive saying for me, like a mantra, I guess. It's just something that can keep me going when I'm having a bad day or just need to reinforce myself. You know, it's like you're still going, you're still squeezing lemons, you know, you're still trying to take care of yourself and your throat and drinking hot tea. You're still going. So
I like that.
It's just something that came up and I've just ran with it.
And so the thought that went through my mind the whole time you were talking about that, your experience in the desert and being brought to a mental health facility by a police officer who was supposed to be helping you, not getting rid of you. And again, I'm sorry you've had to go through all these horrible things. This is something that nobody should have to go through. Is that, you know, all these conservatives are clutching their pearls and making wild claims that trans people are trying to trick them into thinking they're someone they're not. But that's the irony of the situation. They don't realize by stuffing them back in the hole, then they are tricking them into being somebody that this trans person genuinely is not. And it's when they are in the closet, that's when the deception happens. And people who are allowed to live authentically as themselves, ironically to all of the conservative pearl clutching, that's the real them. And they just don't understand that.
Yes, it has been very terrifying to see the, I guess you could say, like, extermination of LGBTQ people in the United States within these past 2.5 months. I didn't start the year out. I didn't start transitioning thinking that my own country would want to exterminate me. And it has been very deeply concerning and troubling for me. But as I say, I'm still standing up and squeezing lemons.
Yeah, and I mean, and that almost, I don't know if it was intentional or not, kind of reminds me of when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. It kind of reminds me a lot of that too.
Yep. If you've if you're given something, take that opportunity and run with it.
So, for the most part, I really wanted to have this be an organic conversation, but one of the questions that has gotten my interest, and you don't have to answer this, we can edit this out if you would like, but what does femininity mean to you, and what does masculinity mean to you?
So I knew you were going to ask this question, so I prepared myself.
And I wanted to be careful because I know you'd expressed some concern that, you know, you've done other podcasts and people kind of took advantage of your journey and your story to promote themselves. So I don't want to like pressure you into answering something you don't want to answer.
I didn't talk about being transgender on the other podcast. They were trying to take advantage of my talents, my creative talents,
Gotcha.
my creative outputs. They didn't take the time to sit down and listen to me and talk to me like you were doing. So femininity to me, if I can even say the word, it's hard for me to say femininity. It's a set of attributes and behaviors and roles that are generally associated with women, trans women, girls, gay men, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of a social construct. You know, all humans can exhibit feminine and masculine traits regardless of their sex and gender. It all depends on the person and how they perceive it. So recently, with the viral video of the black man doing his daily routine, I don't know if you've seen it. It's the guy that has the mouth tape on in the beginning of the video.
No, but I'm going to have to look it up.
He's very buff and bulky and very fit. And a lot of the things that he did in this viral video were outwardly feminine, and it has caused a lot of confusion over the past week or two within a lot of people. And I've been seeing different opinions about that video, and a lot of well-known people have been speaking out about his femininity and whether or not he is being masculine. Are the roles of masculine and feminine being melded together? It was an interesting video to see and process because what he was doing was masculine, but also at the same time it was feminine. And it was very unusual to see a man of his stature, nature, doing those things, like his skincare routine. Like in part of the video, he eats a banana and then rubs the banana peel on his face as if that's part of his like daily routine. He uses a specific sparkling water to wash his face, and it was just kind of mind-blowing to me and a lot of other people. But traditionally, femininity can include like being graceful or gentle or having empathy and humility, you know, sensitivity, crying, being in touch with their emotions. To me, like one of my favorite representations of femininity is the birth of Venus. I don't know if you're familiar with that painting.
Yep.
It's a picture of a nude woman standing in a seashell, and her hair is blowing in the wind, and it's just a very feminine depiction to me, and has been for a very long time, ever since I saw that picture. And it's always registered with me, and I've always wanted to recreate it with a trans woman or a version of myself with my likeness, because I have done that with other famous pieces of art where I've taken myself and replaced the likeness of a feminine person with my likeness. And at the moment, I am still very masculine looking. I've only been on hormones for 10 weeks now, so I'm still at the beginning stages of my transition. So I really struggle with masculine and feminine to this day. But I think that Chaucer was the first one that talked about femininity in like 1380. So it's not a new concept, but it's not an old concept as well. You know, trans people throughout history have existed and will always continue to exist. There was a French writer who wrote that no biological, psychological, or economic fate determines the figure that the human female presents in society. One is simply not both, but rather grows into a woman. And I feel like that's a very strong quote about femininity. Masculinity, on the other hand, means something completely different to me because of my male upbringing in Texas. Being a masculine person in Texas, you are expected to look a specific way, a specific haircut. You are expected to behave and talk and act a specific way. You know, in Texas, toxic masculinity is a very prominent thing. It's a very terrible aspect of living and being in Texas. It's like there's no crying in baseball. You know, that's a famous quote from a movie that I have heard, like, boys don't cry. And growing up as a boy in Texas, I was always put down for being emotional or being feminine or having those characteristics. I was always taught to, like, cut that out. Quit being smart with me. Grow up. What's wrong with you? Be a man. And it's something that I still struggle with to this day. I'm not exactly sure what masculine is anymore. I really struggle with it because I am scared for the future of young men or boys and men in today's society. Because today you have incels, involuntary celibates. These are young men who want to be with women, but they don't know how. They weren't taught. They either weren't taught to be a man or they don't know how to be a man. And it's a huge problem in today's society because you have people like Andrew Tate who are promoting these terrible, terrible views upon women and masculinity and promoting it. And you have these young men that are listening and believing it and following him as a role model when he is one of the terrible person that exists today.
And, you know, to put a fine point on it, I think those people are changing the narrative into a false narrative that being a man means some sort of selfish jackass. And, you know, I think what is missing from that conversation is inner security. And I did a reel on that, so I'm not going to go too far into it.
You did. It was a very good reel.
Yeah, I think the idea that being a man means you can't connect with things that are typically considered feminine is deeply insecure and harmful. It doesn't allow you to be your full self.
I like the fact that you said that you have a connection with Covered Bridges. You like Covered Bridges a lot.
I like a lot of random stuff. It just makes me happy for no reason, and that's one of them.
And more men should indulge in things like that.
Right. Like, why it doesn't have to be like competitive. I'm not like, oh, this thing I did, I can kick your ass, you know. And the thing is weird because, you know, I used to have an anger problem in high school, and I got in my fair share of fights and stuff like that. I can hold my own physically. I'm a big dude, but that's not where I have my pride. It's so far away from what I'm actually proud about and what I like about myself. And what I like about myself is the ability to be honest and open and vulnerable, not in a place of weakness, but vulnerability is a strength, knowing
Yes.
when and where to apply it. But the vulnerability to be honest with myself about what I like and what I want.
Yes, I agree. Like your reel covered it very well. Like you did a very great job with it.
Well, thank you.
I was glad that you did that, and I shared it with people, and they were like, "Who is this? What's going on? Like, what is happening?" Because it's not normal to see a man like you speak out about things like that. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to come and be a part of this, is because you're doing something that is absolutely needed in today's society. Young men need to hear these things. They need to know how to treat people properly.
I think they also need to learn how to have a real conversation and do so with the need to learn, not just to justify what they already feel.
Well, they don't need to harbor these feelings of hatred and anger. They need to learn how to process and work through those emotions and deal with them.
Mm-hmm.
It's terrifying, the hatred that these young men have towards women when the women have done nothing to hurt them or harm them. And it's terrifying to see how they're treating them because of what they see online versus what a father figure has taught them or told them, you know?
And it's also deeply selfish, like the whole trans panic thing. And this is something I've gotten into before, so I'm not going to get too far into it. The idea of ranked gender, where someone who's transitioning from a woman to a man, that's not that big of a deal. But someone who is transitioning from a man to a woman is downgrading for some reason. It's all bullshit. I'm just kind of explaining the thought process, the dynamic that's deeply flawed, in terms of they've got this threat that they might be attracted to someone who isn't biologically female, and it's all about them. It is not about them at all, but they are so instinctively driven to make it all about them, what they are going to inflict on somebody else, driving that other person's entire right to be themselves. And it is so deeply insecure and deeply wrong. And I hope to foster the kind of discussion that makes people learn to see each other as human and not have it be this just selfish, I don't even know what you would call it, just this whole idiom, this selfishness and self-centeredness.
I covered this today on my stories. I had misgendered a friend today by accident, and they were cool about it, and they politely corrected me. And I was just excited, and I said the wrong pronoun. But some people will not be cool about pronouns. So it's best to ask beforehand so you don't upset the person. And in the post, let me see if I can find it. It says, 1, recognize that your intent likely does not matter. The impact is made and you should address it accordingly. So like if you step on somebody's foot by accident, their foot is still hurt regardless of your intent, and therefore you apologize. 2, you apologize and correct yourself, like, I mean she or I mean he, sorry, and then move on. Number 3, which is basically what I'm getting at, is do not make it about you. You know, people have provided excessive apologies upon misgendering people and thinking that would help. In reality, it makes this moment about them, and then you must caretake their feelings about their mistake that hurt me, and I should not have done that. You know, take care of your own feelings of guilt for misgendering in those moments. So it's not about you. It's about their person and their experience and who they want to be, and you need to respect that.
Yeah, and the validation of just acknowledging that they know themselves better than you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's really important.
It is very important. And, you know, transgender people want to be seen a specific way or they don't. It depends on the person. For me, I do want to be seen as a woman. I want to be a woman. I am a woman. I am hormonally, technically, a woman. I am transitioning into a woman. And it took me a while to accept that myself. For a while, I went by they, them. And I was like, I'm only doing that because I'm still masculine. And I saw a video and they were like, why are you still using they, them when you are she, her? And it was like, okay, you know what? I am a trans woman. I need to be true and honest with myself. I am she, her. So I go by she, her now. Even though my voice sounds very masculine and male, even though I dress masculine and male, I do it to protect myself from the people that are around me. So what people see may just be me protecting myself and dressing a specific way so that I am accepted, that I am safe, especially here in Texas. So I dress a specific way so I'm not perceived, so I don't out myself as a transgender person. But I'm getting more and more open as time passes. One thing that I have noticed in these small towns is having nail polish. So I started painting my fingernails again a couple weeks ago, and you will be astonished at the amount of men that will stare and gawk at you just because you have colored nail polish. And it in my mind, it makes them think like, oh, that is wrong. That person doesn't belong here. What are they doing? When in actuality, they're uncomfortable with something that is different than them. They're not used to somebody challenging normal. And it's really interesting existing as a trans person here in Texas because people are so close-minded. People will force their views upon you. And I've gotten to the point where it's just like, I'm just going to be me. If you have a problem with it, that's your problem. I'm still going to stand up and squeeze these lemons. Don't get in my way.
As someone who actually had to challenge that discomfort at one point, I think I can speak to that. And it's all the societal programming. And
yes,
I started to challenge myself as to why do I, again, it comes back to this conclusion that it's all selfish. Why am I so uncomfortable with somebody being authentically themselves and different than what I expect? And one of the things that really helped me break through that was going to my first Pride. And I was dating somebody who had a gay roommate. And my first exposure to Pride and my first exposure as an adult, because I had had some in family members as a kid, but my first exposure as an adult to a gay person in gay culture was this roommate. And I had to confront some of my discomfort because he was a really nice guy, really good dude, but also extra fabulous. And I was used to, I think, more reserved flavor of the gays, and he, in his like extra fabulousness, helped me really get over my selfish discomfort in that, because it was like, oh yeah, this guy's just, it's just him. And like when I went to my first Pride, it was such an overwhelming celebration of authenticity. And I've been going to Pride, I want to say, since 1998.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit, I believe.
Yeah, and it was such an overwhelming, celebration of authentic self that it just, within that first Pride parade, it mostly went away. And it just, all I had to do was really confront myself and the selfish nature of that discomfort.
So, like, for me, being outwardly queer is something I struggle with because growing up, it's like the word queer itself had a negative connotation, especially in Texas. Like, oh, there goes a queer, or there goes the F word. And I've been called both of those many times, but now being queer for me is okay. I can use that term. I'm proud of that term, but it is still something that I struggle with just because of how I was raised or the environment I was raised in, the people around me. So seeing people at Pride is very powerful. It's very uplifting. It is, it's kind of scary to me, to be honest, because these people are risking everything. You know, they're being their true selves, whereas I have been guarded and protecting myself from all these horrible things around me and like my own family, you know? And like a big part of me accepting my queerness was reading an article in a magazine about Alan Cumming and him talking about being pansexual. And that was when I first heard the term pansexual. And he is a very flamboyant gay man. You know, he's married. He's done tons of TV shows. Like, I've grown up with him. Like, he was in Spy Kids when I was growing up. And he's done so much since then. And I always am thankful that Alan Cumming exists and is an example of somebody that has embraced their queerness and that side of them and just gone with it and lived with it and isn't ashamed of it, is open and embraces it. And that was a big deal for me to see and still is today.
And yeah, you know, we've talked a lot about that, like that exposure to positive figures, showing that it's okay to live that authentic life. And I think, you know, once we get through this extinction burst or whatever this is, I really hope that more people are empowered to live their authentic lives openly.
Well, you have to be cautious. I remember being in a specific place when Caitlyn Jenner came out on TV. And I remember that being a very big deal for me. I remember sitting at a table and just crying and weeping because this is a public figure, a celebrity that was doing something different and trying to be something different. And here was me, sheltered, closed off, closeted, and I wanted to do that. I wanted to be brave. I wanted to be a woman. And I just remember being so upset and mad at her for doing that. And I don't know why I was mad, but you have to be cautious about your role models because I don't know that much about her, but I know that she's been on like reality TV and has done some questionable things. So when you're choosing your role models, make sure you vet them, you know, do your research and figure out who they really are, you know?
Yeah. So I have one more question for you before we go.
Okay.
And this is one that's as close to a mandatory question as it gets for this podcast.
Okay.
And it's in the intro. The phrase "women want to be heard" is an incomplete sentence. How would you finish it?
Women want to be heard in all aspects of life. being a woman shouldn't limit your voting rights or your right to get a certain haircut or live a certain lifestyle. You should be able to speak freely no matter your gender. But especially women deserve to be heard and listened to because of an over-dominating male-centered society.
I like that. Well, I really am honored that you chose to trust me with your story, and especially with your background and how hard it is to trust. I really appreciate you sharing your journey online with us.
Absolutely.
And is there any resource that you would like to put out there for maybe a trans person that hasn't been able to admit their authentic self to family or friends, or anything that people should put out, like a link or something like that, or an organization they can turn to?
Yes, I have a few of them. Let me pull it up here for you.
And and after you say these, that we can also put them in the show notes too.
So these are all going to be Instagram pages.
Okay.
One of them is Trans Equality Now. Another one is ACLU Nationwide. The Human Rights Campaign. And there is pointofpride.org, which is an organization. Right now, they are having a fundraiser to raise awareness and funds for gender-affirming care, which is a big deal. There's Planned Parenthood Globe, which I use for my gender-affirming care and injection supplies and hormones and everything. I was there just a few days ago. And the last one that I have is Trans_Week. These are all positive places for trans people. They are speaking out about their rights. They are spreading positivity for trans people, and they have helped me along my own journey. I'm very thankful that Planned Parenthood exists. I'm thankful that Point of Pride exists, and that they are standing up for trans people and trying to take care of them the best that they know how.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one last thing, is there any advice that you would give to someone who is like in your similar situation, where you're a teenager and you don't have that support and you're in a small town?
It's dangerous. It's dangerous, first of all. The best thing that you can do is be true to yourself, whether that is writing down your own thoughts and feelings in a notebook or drawing something. Find somebody that you can confide in and talk to, because right now trans rights for teens are trying to be taken away. It is actually right now in the Supreme Court, and they're trying to decide whether or not trans people or trans teenagers can get gender-affirming care that they need. The one thing I will say is you cannot give up. Don't give in to suicidal ideation. Don't even try and think about that. If that happens, you need to reach out and find help and seek help the best you can. But always remember that your safety is the first thing you should be focused on. If you do not feel safe, you cannot survive.
And maybe find your version of squeezing lemons.
Exactly, yeah. If you can find your own mantra, if you can find something to live for, like I, as a teenager, found art, and art was there for me when nobody else was. Music was there for me when nothing else was. If you can find something that you connect with, hold on to it and run with it. Don't give up on it. Don't give up on yourself. Keep going.
Thank you. I think that's really good advice.
One more thing and one more mantra I keep repeating is from a Modest Mouse song. and the song is called Float On, and I'm sure you've heard it. And in the song, he says, we'll all float on okay. And I play that song often just to reinforce my own ideas and keep going.
It's a good song and a good thought.
Yes, it is.
Well, thank you again for trusting me with your story, and thank you for spending an hour and a half with me.
Thank you, Shane, for giving me the time, for being patient, for being caring, for accepting me who I am, and for wanting to make this world a better place.
Well,
it means a lot.
Thank you. You're welcome, and thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I'll talk to you later.
All right.
Bye. Something I'd like to tag on to the end of this episode, as I'm getting used to a lot of these new people listening and having this many people listening, is that I would really appreciate it if you would go onto your various podcast streaming platforms and leave me a review and a comment. That kind of thing bumps us up in the algorithm quite a bit. And if you want other people to hear this, please help us out and go do so. And again, thank you to all you new listeners for coming in and listening to this podcast.